She cleaned houses other people would not touch. The ones that had been sitting locked and airless for years. The ones where the power had been off so long the inside smelled like the absence of life itself. The ones where families dropped a key in her hand at the door and disappeared before she could ask a single question. She took every job. She turned none of them down. Because every morning before she left, she stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom and watched a woman who had given her everything slowly losing the one thing Calla could not earn back with any amount of hard work. Her name was Calla Pruitt. She was 24 years old. She lived in a 2-bedroom rental on Birch Street in Avondale, Pennsylvania. And on a gray November morning, she drove through the stone-gated entrance of an estate that had been sealed for 31 years and found something inside a locked room that was going to split her life clean in half. I want to ask you something before we go further. Do you believe people should forgive family when the betrayal was done on purpose? Comment forgive or never below. I want to see where you stand before you hear what she did next. Let us get into this story. Chester County, Pennsylvania sits in the southeastern corner of the state, about 40 miles outside Philadelphia. It is an old country in the American sense. Stone farmhouses, iron fences, oak trees that have been standing since before anyone living remembers planting them. Estates that have been in the same family for 150 years, sitting at the end of private roads behind gates that never needed a sign to keep people out. The land does that work on its own. Then, 20 minutes from all of that, the small towns. Narrow streets, row houses with aluminum siding, dollar stores and laundromats and pharmacies where the woman behind the counter knows your mother by her first name and has learned not to make eye contact when the insurance comes back rejected again. That was where Calla lived. That was where she had grown up. And at 24, she was still there, not because she had failed to leave, but because leaving had never been an option. Opal Pruitt, her mother, had started getting sick 2 years before. Fatigue first, the kind that would not lift no matter how much rest she got. Then the swelling. Then the diagnosis that arrived in an envelope from a specialist's office and sat on the kitchen table for 2 full days before Calla could bring herself to open it. Kidney failure. Dialysis 3 times a week. A medication schedule that covered half a page. Bills that arrived so reliably they had started to feel like a second job just to manage. Calla became a house cleaner. Not through a company. Not with a uniform or a paycheck that landed on schedule. She built her client list from handwritten flyers and word of mouth from people who needed work done fast and cheap. Foreclosed homes. Estate cleanouts. Farmhouses sealed for a decade. Full of furniture no one wanted, and air that had not moved since whoever last breathed, it walked out the door for the final time. She brought her own supplies, worked alone and preferred it. Alone meant no pace to match but her own. There was no performance in any of it. She woke at 4:30. She made 2 cups of coffee and left one on the counter for Opal with the right amount of cream, already in it. She went to work. She came home. She made dinner. She sat with her mother through the evenings. She went to bed and did it all again. She had a gift for it, a focus and a thoroughness that clients remembered and passed along. The worse the condition of a property, the more she could charge. She had figured that out early and built her whole approach around it. Which was how, on a Wednesday afternoon in October, the call came through from Grover Property Management out of Westchester, a company she had completed 3 cleanouts for in the past 2 years. A large estate outside Kennett Square. Ashford House, vacant for 31 years, finally released from a legal dispute and cleared for sale. The heir wanted it emptied and market-ready quickly. The rate they offered was nearly double her usual. She said yes before they finished the sentence. She drove out the following Tuesday. The estate sat at the end of a private road lined with oak trees so old their branches had grown together overhead and turned the entrance into a long, dim tunnel. She drove through with her headlights on against the gray November sky. When the road opened up and Ashford House appeared, she sat in her car for a full minute before she moved. 3 stories of pale stone. Tall, narrow windows. A wide front porch with columns that needed paint. Ivy pulling at the mortar along the east wall. The grounds were completely unchecked, grass thigh-high near the perimeter fence. Hedges that had abandoned any shape years ago. A house that had been left entirely alone for a very long time. She pulled on her gloves and went to work. The ground floor took most of the morning, dense with old furniture under dust sheets, boxes of documents stacked in the corridors, a kitchen full of equipment from another era. She worked room by room, logging everything on her clipboard. By early afternoon, she was on the second floor. Most of those rooms were near empty, stripped to bare floorboards and bare walls, the ghost outlines of old rugs pressed into the wood. She moved through them fast. The last door at the end of the upstairs hallway was locked. She tried the key ring the property manager had given her. Third key worked. The door opened with the resistance of something that had not moved in a very long time. The study. Floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves on 3 walls, still full of books. A large desk facing the window. A cracked leather chair behind it. 2 metal filing cabinets along the near wall. A stone fireplace at the far end. And above its mantel, a painting of the Chester County countryside in autumn, thick with dust on the frame. She started with the filing cabinets, emptied them into boxes, moved to the bookshelves, shelf by shelf, from the top down. When she reached the desk, she pulled the drawers one by one. The top drawers slid open without resistance. Papers, old receipts, dried-out fountain pens, a letter opener with an engraved handle. She boxed everything without reading it. The bottom left drawer was stiff. She worked it loose with both hands. Inside, a swollen leather portfolio. She added it to the box. Then she ran her palm along the back wall of the empty drawer. She knocked against it. The sound came back different, not the flat thud of the wood surrounding it, hollow with a slight give. She pressed with both hands. The back panel shifted inward. Behind it, in a space barely the depth of her palm, was a single envelope. She picked it up. Cream paper, aged to the color of old bone, sealed and fully intact. The handwriting on the front was in faded blue ink, careful, deliberate, each letter formed by someone who understood exactly how much those words might one day matter. To be delivered to Jurnee Halstead. Below it, in the same hand, slightly smaller. If not found in my lifetime, for whoever finds this instead, please, find her. Calla read those words twice. She did not know that name. Who was Jurnee Halstead? And why had someone hidden an envelope carrying her name behind a false panel in a desk that no one had opened in 31 years? She turned the envelope over. The back flap was sealed with hardened wax. She did not break it, not there. She set the envelope on top of her clipboard, finished the rest of the study, and drove home with it on the passenger seat beside her. That night, after Opal had taken her medication and fallen asleep, Calla sat under the kitchen light and opened it. Inside was a single folded document. She unfolded it with both hands. A certified bank check, dated October 19th, 1993, issued from a private bank in West Chester, Pennsylvania, made out to Jurnee Halstead. The amount, $420,000, and in the memo line, written in that same careful blue ink, for the child Jurnee asked me to find. She deserves what Jurnee never got. Calla read it 4 times. She turned the check over. On the back, in different handwriting, smaller, shakier, written later, 9 words, I never found her. God forgive me. HB. HB. She pulled the property documents across the table. The estate had belonged to a man named Harlan Brist, deceased, November 1993. The check was dated October of that same year. He had sealed it inside that desk just weeks before he died. She opened her phone. Searched Jurnee Halstead, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Almost nothing came back. Then, in a digitized newspaper archive, one item, a 4-line entry in the Daily Local News, dated August 14th, 1993. A woman identified as Jurnee Halstead, age 19, reported missing. Last seen at a private residence in Kennett Square. Investigation ongoing. No follow-up. No resolution. Nothing after that. 19 years old. Missing. 1993. A child. There had been a child. Whose child? Where were they now? And what did any of this have to do with a 24-year-old house cleaner from Avondale who had never heard that name before today? Calla turned her phone face down on the table and sat there for a long time. Then she walked to her mother's bedroom door and stood in the dark hallway. listening to Opal breathing on the other side. She went back to her room. She lay on top of her covers with the check beside her and looked at the ceiling until the sky outside turned gray. The next morning, she waited until Opal had eaten breakfast and taken her medication. Waited until the color had come back into her face the way it sometimes did before the tiredness settled in again. She sat across the kitchen table from her mother and put the check between them, face up. She watched Opal's eyes move down to it. Every bit of color the morning had given her went away. Opal's coffee cup was still in both hands. She did not set it down. "Mom," Calla said. Opal's eyes stayed on the check. "Do you know that name?" A long silence. A car moved outside on Birch Street. The refrigerator cycled on. "Where did you find this?" Opal asked. Her voice came from somewhere far away. "In a desk at the clean-out job. Behind a false panel in a drawer. There was writing on the front of the envelope. Someone was trying to find this woman. She was 19 years old. She went missing in 1993. I found one newspaper record and nothing after that." Opal set her coffee cup down. She pressed both palms flat on the table. Then she pushed her chair back, walked to the kitchen window, and stood there with her back to Calla. "Mom, give me a minute," Opal said. Calla waited. The minute became 5, became 10. She gave it time. She sat with the check on the table between them and waited, because she had learned long ago that pushing Opal before she was ready produced nothing. When Opal finally turned around, the tightness that had lived in her face for 30 years was gone. She sat back down at the table. "I was 22, she said, when I took the job at Ashford House." Opal had been 22 years old and newly arrived in Chester County from a small town in central Pennsylvania. $30, a duffel bag, and a phone number for a woman who placed domestic workers with estate families in the area. She got the Briss house. The work was hard but clear. She cleaned, cooked when the regular cook was off, kept her head down, and sent money home every 2 weeks. There were 3 members of the Briss family in residence. Harlan, the eldest son, reserved, who treated the staff with distant but genuine courtesy. His younger brother Prescott, who was loud and entitled and watched every woman on staff in a way that made all of them aware of where every exit was at all times. And Jurnee. Jurnee Halstead had arrived 2 months before Opal. 18 years old, from a small town in South Carolina. Fast, bright, and she laughed at things in a way that made every room feel larger than it was. She wrote letters home to her mother every Sunday without fail. She was the first person on that estate who treated Opal like a friend instead of just another worker. Sharper than that house had any room for. She should have been in a university somewhere. By winter, Opal had noticed Jurnee was quieter. The Sunday letters stopped. She stopped finishing her meals. One morning, Jurnee told her the truth. She was pregnant 3 months along. Prescott Briss was the father. She had not gone to him willingly. Opal did not need more than 2 sentences to understand exactly what had happened inside that house. She took Jurnee's hands in both of hers. 2 words came out. "I believe you." Jurnee had gone to Harlan. She believed he was different from his brother. He was, but not enough. Not when it came to the family name. Even Harlan, in the beginning, made the wrong choice. She was told to be quiet, told it would be handled, told she would be taken care of. She was not. When she refused to be silent, when she told Harlan plainly that she would go to the county police and say exactly what Prescott had done to her, the house turned fast. Staff were told not to speak to her. Her room was moved. Her duties reorganized to keep her isolated and working alone. Opal kept showing up. Every day, without announcement, she kept showing up. In April of 1993, Jurnee gave birth. A girl, small and healthy, born in a hospital 2 counties away, paid for in cash by the family. They wanted placement arranged immediately. Jurnee refused. She held her daughter and would not let go. And anyone who came near that hospital bed heard about it clearly. She was 19 years old with no family present, and she was not releasing that child. They gave her 48 hours. On the second night, she called Opal. Opal came. Jurnee was sitting up in the bed, the baby in the crook of her arm. She had been crying long enough that her face had stopped showing it. The way faces do when grief simply exhausts itself. She told Opal what was coming. The family had county connections, attorneys, money, and patience she had none of. They were going to take the child through whatever legal mechanism cost them the least. She had already lost. She asked Opal to take the baby and run. She put her in my arms, Opal said. Her voice did not crack. It went very low and stayed there. She said, "Don't let them have her. Don't let them erase her the way they are going to erase me. Give her a name nobody in Chester County will recognize. Take her somewhere they will not think to look." Opal pressed her mouth closed for a moment. The kitchen was perfectly still. And then she said, "Tell her I loved her before I even knew her face." Calla sat at that table, and a truck moved down Birch Street outside, and she could not hear it. Before I left that hospital, Opal continued, Jurnee did one more thing. She went to Harlan's room. She had nothing left to lose, and she knew it. She told him about the baby, and she asked him to find her daughter if anything happened to her. I found out years later that Harlan had agreed. I ran, Opal said. I had a bag packed under my bed since February, waiting for the moment she asked me. I took the baby and walked out of that hospital at 2 a.m. and did not stop moving for 4 days. 3 bus changes. My cousin in Harrisburg for 2 weeks. Then I kept going until I got here. She paused. I gave you her middle name because I needed you to carry a piece of her. Calla was the name Jurnee's own mother had called Jurnee since she was a little girl back home in South Carolina. A private name from her childhood. No one in Chester County would ever connect it to anything. She looked at her hands on the table. And I never told anyone. Not your father when I met him years later. Not anyone. She looked up at Calla. I was afraid. Every year that passed, I was more afraid to speak it out loud. So I kept it where it was. What happened to her? Calla asked. After you left? Opal turned to the window. She left the hospital the morning after I did, she said. She had nowhere to go, so she went back to Kennett Square, back to the only place she knew. For months later, in August, her name appeared in a missing persons report. Last seen at a private residence in Kennett Square. She stopped. Nobody had reported her missing for weeks before that. By the time anything was in any newspaper, I was already far enough gone that there was no trail back to me or to you. A long pause. It was never solved. But you know what happened to her? Opal pressed her mouth flat. I don't know for certain, she said. But I have known for a long time what most likely happens to a 19-year-old girl with nothing, who refuses to be quiet about what was done to her and who had just tried to save her child from one of the most powerful families in Chester County. She looked directly at Calla. And I have carried that every single day I have been alive since. Calla did not go to work the next day. She sat in her car in the driveway and called Grover Property Management. She asked for the name of the estate's attorney of record. A pause on the line. Then, that would be Ms. Waverly Ott, out of Westchester. She manages the estate trust. She actually contacted us this morning after reviewing your inventory log. Asked us to pass along her number if you called. Waverly had already seen the inventory. She had already been waiting. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building on High Street in Westchester. The name on the frosted glass door was in plain gold letters, no decoration. Inside, the reception was small, organized, and smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. The woman who came out to meet her was 71 years old and walked with the energy of someone who had never once considered slowing down. White hair cut close, reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She looked at Calla the moment she stepped through the door, and her expression shifted in a way that had nothing to do with surprise. She had been expecting this moment. She just had not known which day it would arrive. Come in, Waverly Ott said, before Calla had spoken a word. She sat behind her desk, folded her hands on top of it, and looked at Calla without looking away. You found the envelope, she said. Calla placed the check on the desk between them. Waverly looked at it. She touched the corner with 2 fingers but did not pick it up. Then she leaned back. Harlan came to me in the summer of 1993, she said. He was already very ill. He told me everything, what Prescott had done, what the family had allowed to happen, what had most likely become of Jurnee by that point. He had been searching for the child for months. His investigators found nothing. He wrote the check anyway, Calla said. He needed the intention on paper. She looked at Calla directly. But I need you to understand something. That check has been legally void for decades. No bank will honor a 31-year-old instrument. The check was never meant to be cashed. It was meant to be found. Proof of the amount and the intent. She leaned forward slightly. What actually pays is a separate trust Harlan established with me as trustee. Liquid assets, properly structured. He defined the beneficiary simply as the surviving biological child of Jurnee Halstead. He did not need to know who that person was. He only needed to define the relationship correctly. If such a person could ever be identified and verified, the trust would distribute. The check was the evidence of how much and of why. Fleming Brist arranged this clean-out job? Calla said. Waverly's eyes went hard. Fleming is Prescott's son. He has been trying to get that estate sold for 15 years. He wants it transferred before anything surfaces that complicates the family history. Your inventory log showed an unsealed envelope recovered from the study desk. Fleming was notified by the property management company. Standard client procedure. Everything found, boxed and logged, Calla said. Yes, which means we move now, not later. Waverly picked up the check. What Harlan built was designed specifically to survive this kind of opposition. He was a careful man, just 30 years too late in being careful about the things that actually mattered. Fleming Brist hired an attorney and sent a formal letter to Waverly Ott's office demanding the return of all items recovered from the Ashford estate. Waverly sent one letter back. 3 paragraphs. The third paragraph contained 2 sentences that ended the conversation entirely. The estate carried a legal trust provision. The beneficiary was defined as the surviving biological child of Jurnee Halstead. Calla submitted her own DNA sample the following morning. The match ran against a sample from a cousin of Jurnee's, a woman named Dara Halstead, located through a family tracing organization in South Carolina, who had been asking questions about her missing cousin for 30 years. Dara answered Waverly's call on the second ring and cried for 20 minutes once she understood what she was being told. Results came back in 6 weeks. Calla Pruitt, born April 1993 at a county hospital outside Chester County, Pennsylvania, was confirmed as the biological daughter of Jurnee Halstead. Fleming Brist's attorney stopped returning calls after that. The trust was executed. $420,000 plus 31 years of accrued interest transferred to an account in Calla Pruitt's name. She sat in Waverly Ott's office the afternoon it cleared and looked at the number on the screen and felt nothing for about 30 seconds. Then she felt everything at once. She called Opal from the parking lot. 2 rings. It's done, Calla said. Silence on the other end. Then Opal's voice, barely there. Baby. Just that one word. She paid off Opal's medical debt in full, every outstanding dollar. She hired a private care specialist. She had the Birch Street house properly insulated for the first time in years because Opal had been cold every Pennsylvania winter for as long as Calla could remember and had never once said so. She kept working. The money changed what was possible. It did not change who she was. She built her own company, hired staff, and trained them as she had trained herself, methodically without shortcuts, without pretending any part of it was easier than it was. And on a Friday morning in late March, she drove south. Dara Halstead met her at the front door of a brick house with a garden and a porch with 2 wooden chairs on it. 53 years old with Jurnee's eyes. Calla knew, because by then she had found a photograph. A school picture from 1991. Jurnee at 17, looking directly into the camera with the full, unguarded confidence of a girl who had plans and not yet any reason to doubt them. Calla had looked at that photograph for a very long time. Dara took her face in both hands on that porch and said she would have loved you so much. She already did. Calla could not speak. She nodded. They sat on that porch for 3 hours. Dara told her everything she remembered about Jurnee before Chester County, before any of it happened. A girl who wanted to be a teacher, who could outrun every boy in the neighborhood until she was 16, who called home every Sunday and wrote her letters in purple pen, who was funny and stubborn and full of a life she never got to live. Calla listened to every word and took every moment as it came. There is a love that announces itself to no one, demands no recognition, and costs absolutely everything anyway. Opal Pruitt had been 22 years old. She walked out of a hospital in the middle of the night with a stranger's newborn child. No one she could safely call, nowhere certain to go, and she kept that child warm and fed and safe and loved for 24 years without ever asking anyone to acknowledge what that cost her. She worked 2 jobs when she had to. She went without things she needed, so Calla would not have to. She carried the full weight of what she knew about Jurnee, the guilt, the grief, the not knowing of the worst of it, in complete silence for 3 decades, because she was terrified that speaking it out loud would make Calla feel less like hers. When Calla came home the evening the legal process completed, she sat beside Opal on the couch. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Calla took Opal's hand in both of hers. "You saved my life," she said. "Twice. Once when I was 3 days old, and once every day since." Opal's eyes filled. "I should have told you sooner. You told me when you could." "I was afraid," Opal said softly. "I was afraid you would feel like you were not mine." Calla looked at this woman who had made 2 cups of coffee every morning and left one on the counter with the right amount of cream, who had taken on debt before she would let Calla's path narrow, who had carried a grief with no name on it for 30 years and never once let it fall on the child she was raising. "I am yours," Calla said. "That is not a biology question. That is 30 years of showing up." The story got out the way truth gets out. Slowly at first, then all at once. A legal filing. DNA confirmation. A 30-year-old missing persons case tied to a trust settlement in Chester County. A journalist picked it up. It spread. And with it came something Calla had not prepared for: other women, other families, people who had worked in estate houses across Pennsylvania during those decades and carried their own versions of what happened to young women with no protection and no one watching out for them when something went wrong. She listened to all of them. She set up a fund in Jurnee Halstead's name. Not her own name, Jurnee's. A legal resource for domestic workers across Pennsylvania. Employment abuse, wage theft, representation for women in private household employment who had been wronged and had nowhere to fight from. Named for a 19-year-old girl from South Carolina who refused to be silent and paid for it with everything she had. She drove back to Kennett Square one last time, the week before Ashford House was sold. She walked up to the 2nd floor, into the study. The desk was gone. The bookshelves were bare. The room was just a room. She stood in the doorway and looked at the wall where the panel had been. She thought about a man sitting at that desk in 1993, sick, running out of time, writing a check for a child he could not locate, sealing it behind a panel in an oak drawer, and dying before the day he had prepared for ever arrived. She thought about Jurnee in a hospital room at 2 a.m, pressing her 3-day-old daughter into the arms of the one person she trusted, and saying to her, "Tell her I loved her before I knew her face." She thought about Opal on 4 buses, over 4 days, a newborn and a duffel bag, trading everything she had been before that night for the chance to give that baby a life. She thought about an envelope sitting in the dark for 31 years, waiting. Then she turned around, walked out of Ashford House, and did not look back. Some things that are stolen cannot be entirely returned. Some people live and die without ever receiving what the world owed them, and the world moves on around their absence, as though they were never there at all. But sometimes, not always, not nearly enough, but sometimes the proof survives. The document outlasts the sealed room. The check finds the table. The name on the paper finally comes home. Jurnee Halstead was 19 years old. She had plans and a laugh that filled every room she walked into. She had a mother she called every Sunday. She had a daughter she loved before she ever knew her face. She deserved every single thing this world denied her. Her daughter made sure the world knew that. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved something in you, please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know who in your circle is carrying something heavy right now and needs a reminder that love shows up. Sometimes 30 years late, sometimes through a cracked panel in an old desk, but it always shows up. Drop your city or your country in the comments below. Whether you are in Pennsylvania, Texas, Georgia, London, Toronto, Jamaica, South Africa, Australia, or anywhere else in this wide, beautiful world, let us know you are here. We read every single comment. We will see you in the next one.